Discovered a love I can't ignore. A powerful love, yeah, worth waiting for.
Hey everyone, it's Larissa and...
Only one.
And welcome to another episode of the Love, Discovery, and Dim Sum podcast under quarantine.
By the way, I haven't had dim sum in a long time.
I know, I think you wanted to devote a whole episode to just talking about how much you miss dim sum.
Yeah, but I think people will get tired after 2 minutes of me just rambling on about... listing the different dim sums that I miss.
You know, there are some dim sum restaurants
It's not the same. Unless they push the cart to my front door and let me pick.
I know.
It's just not the same.
I know it's the new normal. It dawned on me the other day that it's been almost exactly a month since we actually were out and about with people.
Mm-hmm. But now I have an idea of doing a video about dim sum carts coming up in my front door. New delivery service? Ooh, I could start that. That's a new business. Okay. Don't take my idea. Have you guys heard that? Dim sum delivery in steaming hot carts.
Well, you know what? One of the things that's been interesting is seeing how there's been like layers and layers of like restrictions on us, right? Like we first started out like social distancing, 6 feet, wash your hands.
I think it started off with less than 6 feet, wasn't it?
I think it was 3 feet, then it turned to 6 feet. Yeah. Now, it was like gatherings of like 200 or more, then it was like 50, and now it's just like, just don't be around anybody and just stay in your room by yourself. The one newest like restriction is the masks, right?
Oh, yeah.
And there's been some kind of mixed feelings about the masks. I know some people are like, good, like they've been doing it in Asia, so it's about time that we finally bring it into here. We actually did a little video recently, a little fun video. If you're a Star Wars fan, even if you're not a Star Wars fan.
Oh, you will like it.
We did a COVID-19 mask with a little special guest from a, Dark Lord Sith.
You're giving it away. I keep thinking of like Jim Carrey right now.
And the mask.
Smoking.
That's a different type of mask.
That's a different mask. Okay, back to the mask.
But if you can wear that out in public and it will protect you, go for it. One of the things that's coming up is people of color, whether you're African American or Latino or Asian American, are actually feeling like they shouldn't wear masks because now it's bringing on a stigma that if somebody looks at them, they're automatically thinking, even though everybody's supposed to be wearing masks, but, we've heard some stories where people who are Asian are getting yelled at by people that are non-Asian who are also wearing masks, but because they're wearing masks, they're like, go back to your country. And people are like turning away from people that are wearing masks, where people that are African American are saying, well, because we're wearing these masks, people think we're thugs, or we're going to like rob them. Because that's the impression is if you're...
Are you putting bandanas on them?
Exactly. Because people, but I mean, that is a perception and a stigma where people are like, I don't want to wear a mask because I don't want somebody to shoot me because they think I'm a criminal.
So are there
or there's somebody to yell at me or beat me up because they think I'm from Asia, even though everybody American is supposed to be, or in other countries as well that are not necessarily, in America, like that are Asian, are all wearing masks. But because it was so associated with that.
What if you're a motorcycle biker wearing those Harley Davidson with a mask on their face?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's either normal or you're obviously going to make your assumptions. But these are like real fears that people have, because unfortunately, even since our last podcast, where we were talking about some of these hateful incidents and hostility against Asian Americans,
Seems to be getting worse.
It's actually gotten increased occurrences of it.
Apparently, they have not listened to our last podcast.
They didn't. They can't. People can't tell the difference between Chinese and Chinese Americans and other Asians. So people need to listen to that podcast. And there's been over 1,000 incidents reported and growing. And it's not just limited to the United States. We're hearing reports from Canada as well. People are not just getting yelled at and getting, hurled expletives, but they're getting punched. One woman went up to a guy in New York City. He was on an Asian guy was on a cell phone, and she just started hitting him and telling him, like, you brought the coronavirus and all this other stuff. She, first of all, wasn't practicing safe distancing if she went up to the guy.
That's right. You can't beat anybody up if you're 6 feet away.
I saw one thing that one guy, who was a white guy, had written on his mask, "Thanks, Chinks," on his mask.
Oh, man.
And then somebody on the sidewalk had wrote the words, "F off, gooks."
I think if I had a mask, it would say, I don't have it, but you might. So that's why I'm wearing a mask.
No, exactly. Again, the coronavirus, COVID-19, it's not discriminating, against anyone. It's basically attacking everyone, and it's really no one's fault. Yes, it originated in China, but at this point, it's all over the world. It's
Not
really
according to the
beyond,
Chinese.
and yeah, and don't believe the conspiracies, that the Chinese created it. And again, we are Chinese Americans.
Aliens created it.
We're Chinese Americans. We didn't create the virus. Our daughter has never been to China, as we mentioned in our little PSA about encouraging people to know the difference between Chinese, as well as on our last podcast. But the most heinous of the crimes so far, most serious, is this guy in Texas, Jose Gomez, who's only 19 years old. He confessed to Midland Police Department at Midland, Texas, that he actually stabbed an Asian American family, wanted to murder them. This was back in March 14th. Because he thought that they were infecting people with coronavirus because they were Chinese.
Just that one family.
That one family. And here's where's the terrible part. There was a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old involved in the stabbing. But he attacked kids. And it turns out this family wasn't even Chinese. They were Burmese.
Oh my gosh.
So again, it goes back to people don't even know. They
don't
just
know
had
the
an Asian
difference.
face, assumed it. And this guy was young. It's not like he's some old, white racist guy. Based on his name, again, I don't want to make assumptions. Like, he could just have lineage that his Hispanic or Latinx. But, he's not even necessarily pure white. And he is saying these things. And he actually attacked them and stabbed them and is facing a lot of time in jail, if not life, for attempted murder. And so he's very explicit with his intent of why he wanted to stab them.
Did he think that family was like the mothership? So you just get one family, and then all of a sudden the rest of the world is cured.
You know what? That's the thing about what's going on with a lot of this is, some people are saying like there's just a lot of hate going around. Yes, there's a lot of hate, but I think a lot of this hate is born out of fear and anger. And again, not to excuse it, but this is where when people are angry and they are fearful of stuff, they start to get irrational.
They're not thinking straight.
And they start to get a little cray-cray, you know what I mean? Now, there are some people that really do have mental health issues. We're also seeing reports of that, where people that are mentally unstable are now obviously having very difficult
Heightened
sensitivities. And they're getting angrier and they're getting more belligerent.
Which still
than
does
normal.
not justify
Again,
it.
it doesn't justify it. And so there's a lot of racial biases and a lot of racial insensitivities that are coming out, to put it lightly. And so what we wanted to discuss today, too, wasn't just these incidents, because, a lot of people are covering in the news. We're part of a lot of groups. It's getting a lot of traction. What we wanted to actually talk about is how can we stop people from being racist? And can people really stop being racist? Those are interesting questions to pose, right?
So by the end of this podcast, there will be no more racists.
Or we will have told you how you can stop being racist or how you can help others stop being racist. What we're going to do is we're going to talk through some of these situations. First of all, there are some people that are longtime racists, and it is very hard for them to change maybe the way they're thinking because they've felt that way so long. And in some sense, it literally takes an act of God to change them. And I know some people think like once a racist, always a racist, but there's also a lot of people that are in the middle, right? That don't start out racist.
Yeah, I was like, you could also say...
Once you were not a racist, then you became racist.
Yeah, you say it too, but...
Because something happened to you where it changed your perception and all of a sudden you had a bad experience with someone in that race, and then you start to generalize. On the flip side, we know somebody that's Asian that had no ill will towards the African American community until he was robbed twice by people that were African American. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, he had a very big distrust of that race because the people that happened to rob him were African American. Now, if they had been Jewish or they had been, somebody else Asian, maybe he would have felt the same way about another race or a different thing. But I don't know. But that experience your negative experience informs how you form your opinions, right?
Right.
And what I know to be true, especially having a daughter, if you look at kids, like people aren't born racist.
No.
Racism is learned.
Yeah, so you can't really say once a non-racist, always a non-racist, because pretty much everyone starts off non-racist.
Right, or you can't say once a racist, always a racist, right?
You can't say either one of those.
You think about if you're into Shakespeare, right? The Capulets and the Montagues and Romeo and Juliet, they were warring houses, or fast forward to the West Side Story version, right? The Puerto Ricans, the gangs, and the whites, right? The Sharks and the Jets, right? And it was all like Maria and Tony wanted to fall in love, and they didn't care. They weren't born racist, right? Like, they were born into these families and these that were part of these, like, neighborhoods that had these preconceived notions of whether white people or what's Puerto Ricans or Capulets or Montagues, or like we like to say, sports rivalries are the same way, right? Like, you aren't born hating a specific sports team. Like you hate the Lakers. I love the Lakers.
Yeah. And I guess...
And you have taught our daughter to hate the Lakers, which
I'm doing a great
really,
job.
really making me mad.
Yeah.
She's going, go Clippers. And I'm going, why?
But to your point, I guess I wasn't always a Laker hater. It's because they did something bad to me.
You're a Sacramento Kings fan.
That's right.
If you're sports fans out there and you know what happened with Western Conference Finals.
Yes, the
way
cheaters
back.
actually won.
No,
So
don't
that's
blame
a whole
the refs.
nother
That's another
podcast.
thing.
Yeah,
but as a result
podcast.
of that bad experience, you have now taught our daughter to
also
hate
be
the Lakers.
an anti-Lakerist.
Even though I love the Lakers and they are my favorite team. Like, this is just another illustration. And the other thing is, like, racism isn't just limited to people, like, white people, like, being angry at every person of color, because, if you go back historically, and you can even say today, for example, the Japanese, and I'm not trying to pick on the Japanese, but they were kind of the big bad back in the day, especially around the early 1900s, during World War II. That's why they were the big bad. They kind of had the same thinking as the Nazis, right? The Nazis
That's around the same time area.
The Nazis, Hitler thought, like, the Aryan race was the pure race. Well, the Japanese thought their blood was like
pure.
the pure blood, and they also just thought they were better than everybody else and started conquering everyone, right?
Of course, China is called the Middle Kingdom because China is the center of the world,
Right.
so they think they're the purest.
So I think every ethnic group, every country has a sense of, self-centeredness, right? So I
And
think
we all came from Africa.
right.
So Africans think that they're the center.
There, and there's classism, there's colorism,
There's every-ism.
as every ism, and I think you were making this point, like, in our country, like, no one's really
Yeah, there's
from
no
here,
true.
right?
Yeah, there's no a true Americanism. Like, there's no true
Right, because
ethnic American race because
all the European whites came over because they were trying to escape persecution from other white people, right? For religious reasons initially.
Same reason why everybody comes here now. They're trying to escape somewhere.
They're trying to escape something, right? It's an issue worldwide where we have this. So I think understanding a little bit of history, understanding some of those dynamics is important. We actually have a story of someone that we met. We did a documentary called Far East Deep South and Finding Cleveland. And in our new movie, Far East Deep South, about, your family and the early Chinese families in Mississippi during segregation, we interviewed a pastor who is white, who pastored a Chinese church. That was there, and that church was actually very instrumental in helping the Chinese find community and setting up mission schools,
Get education when they could not go to the white
when they
schools,
couldn't
right.
go to white school because of segregation. And so this pastor, who later took over the congregation, and is now since retired, he was telling us about how he grew up in a racist family, and how he grew up racist when he was younger.
I guess in his story, he could have been considered born a racist because he was born into a family
that had just like you're
racist
born into
tendencies.
The Capulets or the Montagues or the
Yeah.
or any type of family. So he learned that. It's still
Yes.
learned, right?
Yeah, still learned.
He learned
Yeah.
that from his family.
Yeah,
he learned
that's-
it from the dominant white culture
Right.
at the time.
And that's probably as close as he could get to being born that way.
Right. And we've heard that from many people. Again, not to excuse it, but like that's how he was
Raised.
born and raised. Now he ended up taking a different path, and in his case, he is a pastor. When he had a personal encounter with Jesus and he decided to turn his life around, and he realized that God loves all children, he
Right.
loves everybody of every color and race and ethnic background, that he had a change of heart, and he started to love people for who they were and not because of the color of their skin.
So that message of love that he found from reading his Bible, I guess, was what changed him. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean that's part of it, and everything that he experienced. He started to see the world through different eyes.
Yeah.
And so then he became again a pastor of a Chinese church. Maybe people he used to make fun of, he used to have a negative view of.
Now specifically, I do recall talking to him about this, and he used to say like he just really despised Chinese people. Like he grew up not liking people that looked like us at all, just because he was raised that way.
Yeah, back in the early times, probably his father, his grandfather's time,
Right.
the Chinese were the ones that were quote unquote taking the jobs away, or because
Yeah,
they were
I don't
working on
know.
the railroads. I'm just saying, like that's kind of
For whatever
the
reasons it was,
conditions
right.
that were at the time. That was during the time of the Chinese Exclusion
Mm-hmm.
Act. So this was kind of the national sentiment that was being conveyed. Some of the
Right.
propaganda, anti-Chinese propaganda that we have a lot of cartoons that
Right.
are in our movie that
And actually,
show that.
there weren't even that many Chinese in that Mississippi area way back then.
It was significant, but it wasn't as many as in, California,
Right.
say. But I mean, that's just like even today where there's xenophobia about, like the COVID-19 right now, like you would think like Asians are taking over the world or something with this disease. I mean, that's what people are trying to heighten like fears with something. And so I think, that's an example of someone who can change, because I think there's a lot of people that are quick to write off people.
Sure.
Again, you can't change everybody.
Right.
But there is hope
But there's hope.
And I think we have to allow room for people to be able to change, because I think that should be our goal, right? Like our goal should be, let's make people less racist.
I think the whole goal is that, like, I don't think anybody ever wants to be defined by who they were in the past. Everybody wants to be defined by who they can become in the future, right? But we always tend to want to say, oh, well, somebody is like this back then, they'll always be like that forever.
Right. And I think this is one of those things. I mean, yes, if you murder somebody, you should go to prison for life. But I know people who murdered people that
never
have
murder
changed,
again.
that will never murder again, or had a change
Right.
of heart. They realized what they did wrong because maybe they did it when they were young, or they did it when they were angry. It was a crime of passion. Again, not to excuse them. They're serving the consequences because of that. But at the same time, I think sometimes people can get in race jail, like for saying, again, if you commit a crime where you're killing somebody out of racial or doing something very violent, you can still be redeemed, but at the same time there needs to be consequences. But people that are making very racist comments, people that are hurling insults, people that are doing very insensitive things, there is still hope for them, and part of it just needs to be educating them. We had a very diverse crew on our film Far East Deep South, and we had several friends that were white that happened to work on our crew. And one of the things that was really interesting is, these guys weren't like hardcore racists or even racists at all, but they may not have thought about certain things that happened to the Chinese, before this. So, like, for instance, our editor, when we started talking about some of the incidents that have been happening, even before the COVID-19, right? We shared an incident we had at a bowling alley, or some other incidents where people were saying things or making assumptions of us, thinking we weren't from this country. And he's like, you know what, I've never had anybody tell me go back to your country. He's German American, like he's third generation German, you're fifth generation in this country, and your family's been in this country longer than his family's in, but he's by nature of him being white has never been asked that question. He's never had anyone say in this time period, like, go back, you Nazi. Maybe if you were in the 1940s and you were German, like, it may have been a little bit rougher, especially if you spoke with an accent. But, like, he being German American, like, nobody has ever said, like, go back to Germany, right?
Right.
And then we had another crew member, one of our camera guys, like, he's from Mississippi. Again, he grew up in a different culture. Again, he's not a racist guy, but maybe there were certain racial biases or things that he grew up with that he never thought about. When we posted our anti-Asian racism, like, PSA the other week, he shared it, and he also just, like, wrote this beautiful Facebook post about how these things shouldn't be happening to Asian Americans. And I love the fact that, because, again, he's white, I felt like it had more power in some sense, because it wasn't like, because you know what keeps happening is, like, everybody keeps, like, saying we're a bunch of complainers and whiners. Like, what do we have to complain about? Because, oh, you guys all go to college, and, like, you're good at math, and you're all a bunch of doctors, or, I mean, like, this model minority. And, I hope people will agree, like, 2-year-olds and 6-year-olds getting stabbed because people think they're Asian and have the coronavirus is wrong.
Yeah.
I hope you understand it. Yes, people shouting things at us.
Oh.
Sticks and stones will break your bones, but words will never hurt you. I mean,
no, that's worse. I'd rather get beaten up once and let my bones heal than have people say so. But they're both bad.
Sometimes the damage from the psychological damage can be equally as damaging and longer lasting.
Yeah, I mean, there was a guy that ended up on a rampage shooting people because he grew up with a bunch of people, making racist jokes about him.
Right, so you may be turning people, the angry Asians, into serial killers. So, like, think about that next time. Now, again, hate begets hate, but we need allies. So, we bring up a couple of those examples to say, one, people can, one, people can change given the right circumstances of education. Secondly, people that might be in the middle or neutral can become your allies. We went and showed an early version of our film, Far East Deep South, into a predominantly African-American school out in Mississippi. These are like 4th grade to 8th grade kids, but a lot of the teachers were African-American. After the teachers saw our film and saw kind of the struggles that the Chinese community had in the South and the same racism that was like hurled at them, she actually came up to us afterwards. She's like, I grew up in Mississippi. I went to Chinese grocery stores. I never thought about what it was like to be in their shoes. I never thought about what they had to go through too. So sometimes it's trying to reach out, because I know some other ethnic groups, other people of color are also, there are the perpetrators, a lot of these incidents on Asians. And so I think it's also trying to find connecting points with other people of color, empathizing with one another. I know we've shared a lot about the issue. We've shared about a couple of examples of what we can do, but we want to give you some other practical things of what we can do to prevent racism, really. And this is a long-term problem. We're not going to solve it overnight or one podcast.
At the end of the podcast.
As you mentioned.
That's our goal. End of the podcast.
And you know what? I've brought this up in many incidents, whether I'm sharing about the film or I'm sharing about the podcast or something, we're saying a PSA. And, there's always someone snarky guy, and it's, it's somebody Asian too, right? Like, that's snarky, and you're like, people are going to get a change. There's no use even bothering doing it. And I would say...
Is it worth it to just change one?
Yeah, well, and you know what? Most of those people, I think, don't have kids. Because they're thinking about the here and now, and a lot of the angry people are like adults, because obviously the kids don't know any better, right?
Right.
But what I always bring up, okay, so if you think, so let's just make that hypothesis, like, all old people who are racist will never change. Okay, if you want to believe that, go ahead. All right, it might be mostly true, may not be all true, but if you want to believe it's 100% true, let's think about the next generation at the least, right?
Right.
It's not too late for our kids. It's not too late for the next person that's born. Our neighbors just had a baby. It's not too late for that baby that was just born 2 days ago.
Right.
For them to grow up in a world where they're learning something different,
right.
And they're white, right?
Right.
So hopefully them having Chinese American neighbors, us having conversations with them, is going to help their child not be a racist.
Right.
Right?
In fact, like, our daughter, she goes to a Chinese immersion school. Now, this Chinese immersion school, only 40-something% are pure Asian. And the rest of them are either mixed or Latino or white or black. I remember in kindergarten, she would tell us about her friends at her school, and we didn't know which one she was talking about by saying their names. So we would say, like, which one is it? Is it the... Is he white? Is he black or Chinese? She was like, all my friends are Chinese. I'm just like, oh, okay. I'm like, she's like, yeah, we're all Chinese. What? So I don't know how to tell you which friend it is. It's my friend so-and-so, and they're Chinese. I'm just like, well, less than half of the kids in your class are Chinese. So I still don't know which one. Like, but they're all Chinese.
Because they all speak Chinese in their
Right.
Mandarin immersion. So she associated identity with language.
Right.
As opposed to color of the skin. So how she ended up describing it is like, so-and-so had darker skin.
Right.
So-and-so had lighter skin.
Right.
It wasn't black, it wasn't white, it wasn't yellow,
Right.
It was
Or
just
darker
shades,
hair,
or darker hair,
or
or
yellow
braids.
hair, or...
Like, she didn't see color. So we know firsthand, kids do not see color when they're brought into this world. That gives me hope if we can educate them. And, we mentioned about gaining advocates, but also really we have to get to the root of the problem, which is the education.
Yeah.
It's what's portrayed on media. It's the messages that we're sending, what the kids are growing up in, that is really forming their opinions on things, right?
Yeah, I mean, just a few weeks ago at a local school, our Chinese immersion school actually graduates into a middle school that's also Chinese immersion. And now those kids are being attacked or racist remarks are made towards them because of the virus.
Right, and this was happening before everything shut down.
Right before everything shut down. And the parents are getting all distraught. How do we solve this issue? Blah, 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 blah. And I was like, we need to educate them. It's a longer process. I know you want an answer right now, but what really needs to happen is we need to find ways to educate these kids to let them know how American we really are and that we have more in common. And I can do that after our film's out and our education programs, but it takes a long time. They're like, no. What we need is the principal to just send a letter out and tell them to stop. I was like, okay, well, that's one thing. But, like, is that really enough? You just need an authority figure to say, like, hey, that's wrong, stop it. And then all the kids all of a sudden are like, you're right, Mr. Authority Man.
Oh, I'm not going to be racist anymore. I'm just not going to think that. I'm just not going to say it out loud anymore, but I'm going to think that way still, right?
But no, we need to educate them. But even in our community, we want an immediate solution.
Right.
And unfortunately,
it's this cancel culture. I mean that's part of it. It's like somebody says something racist, you want them off the board, or you just want them to stop, or you want some type of punishment, they get fired or something.
Suspend all the kids that are making racist remarks, and then we'll be better.
Now, I'm not saying people shouldn't get consequences for their actions or if they're doing some racist. So that needs to happen. But the other side on the long term, so that's short term. Punish the people. They do need to be called out. They need to be punished.
But you still have to educate them.
But you need to educate it because they're just going to go right back to being racist.
They're just going to be even worse. They're going to come back and be like, you're the one who got me kicked out.
Exactly. And the blame goes around. Fired.
Now I hate you even more.
Yeah, and then if somebody does just genuinely realizes, and I know again people are skeptical, like they said it, that's how they really believe, they're not going to change. Like if somebody is really genuine in making efforts to try to make amends with the and become an advocate, like you need to start to welcome them in and help them become less racist.
Yeah.
Because I think that's part of it, is we need to allow people, because otherwise if you say they're a racist and they try to change and you still call them a racist, then what's the point of them even trying to change, right? They're just going to continue to be racist. Well, we have to
stop defining them by their past.
Exactly. It's like a criminal, right? Like if somebody's a criminal and you label them as a criminal and they decide to do something good and turn their life around, but you still think of them as a criminal and you still arrest them, for what they're doing, even though they did nothing wrong. Like they might as well commit the crime because you're going to accuse them of it anyways, right?
Right.
So that's not what we want. Let's think about the next generation. Again, we know this is a long process. We are trying to work. We welcome other people who want to help us in the education system. We know a lot of people are doing some great things, but we really have to start the dialogue. We have to start the awareness at a much earlier age in order to get through to people. And I also feel like there's power in getting to the kids who may have quote-unquote racist parents, because I think the kids can change the hearts of parents. Let's not avoid this elephant in the room. With some of our families that are Asian, there are some racist mentalities from the Asian community towards other ethnic groups. And sometimes it does take our generation educating the older generation from our point of view about certain things, right?
Yeah, I think definitely that when people have seen our film, and some of them have not heard, Asian people that have not heard our story, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, wow, we lived in the black community too. We had no idea we had so many things in common. That actually did change some people's minds about how they might need to treat each other.
Yeah, and likewise, one of our intentions too with our film was to show the black community in a positive light, so that the Asian communities, if there were people that had those preconceived notions of the negative preconceived notions of the African American community, that they also could see the African Americans in a very, very positive light, especially in relation to the relationship with the Chinese. Because again, it's a two-way street that I think it was very, very important, so that there's a lot of people that have negative racial biases both ways. As we kind of wrap things up, these are things to ponder upon. We need to do this together collectively as a community. And I think it just boils down to also it's not even just about race, it's just about common decency right now, right? It's just like, I feel like some people just don't even have good manners, right? Like, don't yell mean things and racial slurs at people. Like, that just is like, love your neighbor. I mean, that's something we try to live by.
And it's hard to retaliate in a loving way too, when that's put on us.
Right, or loving your enemy. That's the one verse in the Bible that's always like, oh my gosh, like, how do you love your enemy? You wanna fight fire with fire, an eye for an eye. It is really hard to do that, but you're not gonna win over anybody with hate.
So don't bring my sword to the grocery store is what you're saying.
Yes, don't do that. I know a lot of people are stocking up on their ammo, but and I'm not saying you can't protect yourself. Again, just teaching people of all colors and backgrounds, treating people the right way that you want to be treated. And so I think, again, this goes to now and it goes to the next generation. Some resources that are out there if you are a victim of a hate crime. And I do want to, make the distinction between a hate crime and saying something hateful, right? Actual crime, as defined by the FBI, is hate crime is a traditional offense like murder, arson, vandalism, with an added element of bias. Assault, that would be in part of it. And so if it's motivated by race, for that is a hate crime. Hate speech If people just say something to you, that's just hate speech. That is not actually a crime. But please do report the hate crimes to the police or the FBI, because a hate crime is a federal offense and punishable by law. It could actually be both. You could actually be local, if it's battery, that's a local crime, but you could also get charged on top of that with a federal crime. So do report those incidents. Now, for some of those other incidents, both the criminal and also those hate speech crimes or insults or other incidents, there are some people that are collecting data. Stop AAPI hate. We know some people involved with that. We're going to post some of these links on our website. You can also Google them. Stop AAPI hate wants to collect all those incidents, because we do want to show people that these incidents are happening and to report them. Because if people don't know about it, people just keep thinking, oh, it's not really that big of an issue. Like, oh, racism against Asians is really not widespread, because we hear that a lot too. But we want people to, we don't want it to increase. So if it's not increasing, don't report bogus stuff. We're not trying to pad the numbers here. We hope it's actually going down. Between our podcasts, our PSAs, other efforts that other organizations are doing, we are trying to get those numbers down, because we don't want somebody to actually get killed. As it is, kids getting stabbed is bad enough. Let's not get to having to bury somebody over this. But we do want to make sure that these are being recorded and being tracked, so people know that this is an issue, and so that law enforcement can respond accordingly as well, and that resources can be doled out to protect those who are being affected. I know you guys are probably experiencing a lot of anxiety, whether you're Asian, you're non-Asian. This has been a big issue that has affected a lot of people's lives negatively, and everybody is getting a little bit more sensitive and testy, and the longer this goes, I know tempers are going to flare. So we just encourage you to keep a calm head about you. Try to be as loving as possible to others around you. Try to be as understanding, even if they're not nice to you. And that is a very, very, very difficult thing to do.
There you go, looking at me again.
I'm not looking at you.
You were looking at me.
If anything, you've been a model of reaching out to our neighbors, helping to deliver food. And so far, nobody has yelled at you, go back to your country, stop bringing me food,
I'm in my
hopefully.
country.
I know, you're in your country. And I know you will go off on people, starting to give them the whole background on your lineage in this
We're gonna
country.
get a history lesson.
So we all need a history lesson. Let's arm ourselves with knowledge, with compassion for one another during this time. You can follow us at LDD Podcast on our social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. You can also go to our website, podcast.loveanddiscovery.com. We'll be posting some of the resources to the links to report any hate crimes related to this. And also you can find our PSAs, especially the new Star Wars one that we did about masks, on our website. We hope you stay safe, you stay healthy. We'll see you next time on our podcast.
Be safe. Peace.
I like to eat dim sum. I like to eat it every day. You can use a fork if you can't use chopsticks to eat dim sum. There's no wrong way. I like to eat dim sum. I like to eat it every day.
'Cause it's my favorite food.
You can use a fork if